Next, we have another interesting panel for you for the stakeholder collaboration panel, the race to market, achieving accelerated scalability and quality. For this panel, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Georg Singewald. He is the Global Head, MSAT, and Engineering at Roche Genentech, Switzerland, and he is also the Asia Liaison and International Board Director for ISPE. Please welcome Georg.
Jeffrey, thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be back today virtually, and then the next 2 days in the live conference. So today, I think the topic is really relevant and a good follow-up from what we just heard in the previous panel and from regulators. Today I brought again 3 really good colleagues and professionals from our industry from different perspectives. And I want to introduce the panelists and want to start with Oliver Schläfli. He's the Senior Vice President and Head of Global Quality at Lonza. And Oliver is a quality executive for many, many years. And he started his career at the health authority, Swissmedic, then moved to academia in Norway, and then started his career in industry, which is also longer than 20 years already, working for Novartis in many different roles, and now for some years already at Lonza as the global quality head. So thank you very much, Oliver, for joining from Switzerland. So it's 4:30, and it's really great having you this year again. In Germany, actually, we have Kristian. It's also 4:30 in the morning for you, Kristian, and thanks for joining us as a partner from McKinsey. And you're leading today, so Kristian is leading the development operations service line, which includes CMC, clinical supply, launch, and tech transfers. And prior to that, he was leading also the service line for supply chain. And in this role, he's focusing on operations, development, and strategy-related topics in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry. And you're leading actually projects I've seen that across Europe, the US, Middle East, Latin America, Asia. So you're more or less everywhere. And doing this obviously as a language talent. So you did your master thesis at the MIT. But you also did the second thesis in France. So today we speak English, okay, but probably another time French or German. Let's see. And finally, again, also with us, Mohan from Merck. Great having you again, Mohan. Mohan is the Global External Advocacy and Strategic Lead for Global Quality and Compliance at Merck. Before that, he had multiple roles at Merck in the small molecules development quality, as well as heading CMC regulatory affairs. And prior to that, roles in analytical sciences for many, many years, for example, also at Sanofi. And actually, yeah, getting Mohan is difficult. He's so much connected in the industry and is sharing mainly his passion on PAT and science-driven risk-based approaches by counseling the expert panel for the United States Pharmacopoeia, running also for pharma, several working groups around ICH Q13. We both work together in the nitrosamines task force as well. And Mohan is also chairing as the vice chair, the quality coordinating committee of IQ Consortium. So a great panel again. And again, thank you for having you. And let's get started. So I think the title of the panel, Achieving Accelerated Scalability and Quality, Race to Market, obviously we can translate to, patients are waiting for new modalities, for new therapies, and what have we learned from the pandemic. And I think in the last years in conferences, we are very often talked about what does the pandemic teach us? How are we working differently? Today, we want to focus on what have we tried to implement and have successfully also sustained in our operations as an industry following the pandemic from an operational context. And I would want to start with Oliver, probably to give us some examples from your role and from Lonza, how you're sustaining coming out of the pandemic in this post-pandemic transformation.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Georg, and a great question. So interesting. Honestly, I thought there will be little which is actually left after the pandemic situation, and I thought it's just an exceptional thing, and then we are going back to normal. I was actually teach differently. It's amazing to see what actually is still sustaining, after the pandemic situation. And one of the obvious things is not an operational element, but it is the home office, the policies, the flexibility we are offering, I think an important element. But much more, I'm amazed to see along the whole value chain how collaboration improved with suppliers, with customers, and within the network of a distinct company. And an example is, the pandemic also brought us into situations where we had actually stockouts, where there was a problem with deliveries and supplies. And the level of collaboration to talk about what is the demand and what is the capacity, what are suppliers able to deliver, and to have a meaningful discussion about priorities. And even, amongst competitors, to ensure that everyone gets what is needed, and simple things, disposables and filter and things like that became actually short. And this level of collaboration with suppliers and with our customers is still persisting, and I think an excellent thing which we need to bring further, because it helps us to actually have the material we need available. It goes from media, disposal, but even bigger things. And as you know, Lonza is, as we speak, building a lot of new assets, and it goes beyond just, the operational batch material, but it's also about the new tanks we have, the piping and the construction material. So that was amazing to see. Another element which is really interesting is how regulators actually responded. Yes, they are back into our facilities. Yes, they are inspecting as before, and there's a certain catch-up they are doing. But we see that especially FDA, the request for information tool is widely used. And so we got really PIEs, which could be done more virtual, and they did this request for information. We sent the material, they did it offline and came back with questions, and with this did not necessarily visit our site. So these are just two examples which I think are very promising to see. A third one to add is for sure also, and that's the next one for the new modalities, that there is a great interest to make things available faster, and that there are some features we learned actually as an industry together with our regulators, and to make things faster available.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Oliver. And we heard about the request for information just in the panel before as well, that goes beyond also the US FDA with other authorities as well. And I think that's a perfect segue to Mohan and especially also your area. So can you follow up a little bit on that also from the post-pandemic transformation, sustainability you see also with external engagements?
Yeah. First, thank you, George, for the invitation to be in the panel. I'll start with some high-level generic approaches. I think in the last panel, we heard them talk about mutual reliance. So one area is mutual reliance. The other one is the need for early decision-making, and how, like what Oliver talked about, engagement with regulatory authorities, certainly related to, in this case, I'll speak to CMC matters. And maybe, one thing that probably is even more that receives more emphasis than even before normal traditional development is how do we actually think about post-approval changes. So given that externally, there's a lot of engagement with regulators. Let me just also piggyback on what Oliver said. Internally, within our own company, things that we have learned about how we can even adopt doing remote audits internally because of the travel restrictions, et cetera, that we went through. And the second one is when we bring drugs through the pandemic piece, although there were already breakthrough therapy designations, PRIME in Europe, etc., this actually brought us to think more creatively to speed up what we have to do with respect to accelerated stability, extrapolation of that data to really predict shelf life. And also things that we didn't probably maybe, how do we actually use non-commercial sites to really work to bring products quickly? So some of the aspects, let me just elaborate a little bit more. One thing that we typically have done, it is no new information. In a conventional development, we obviously did a lot of things sequentially. And one of the things that made us really rethink is in the current pandemic situation, there were several things that we were trying to achieve in parallel, not waiting for something to happen to trigger the next step. So what we are now trying to do is whatever we have learned during the pandemic, how can we actually apply that to the current development traditional approaches? So in that context, engagement and expectations that we learned from regulators have been significantly helpful. And the other one is, the scalability of how we actually brought things. Here, technology is really helpful. Maybe application of something like we can hopefully talk a little bit later, maybe using things like emerging technologies like continuous manufacturing that really helps using our maybe platform technologies. So in a nutshell, what I wanted to say is there are a multitude of aspects that were pockets of things that helped us to get the first set of, say, emergency use authorization. And even here, while we think the pandemic probably helped us from a regulatory perspective, there is really not a great global harmonization. For example, in the US, when you get emergency use authorization, there are several engagements and the regulators were extremely helpful, really reaching out and talking very frequently to advance things. Now, when we look at Europe, there is no centralized approach for something like emergency use. So it is actually country by country. So the expectations were slightly different. But even with that, what is of importance to note is regulators actually collaborated with industry significantly. And as I said, we have done several things, especially in even safety studies. Obviously, nothing we compromise because that's very critical, but the design of studies, how do we actually pull out data faster? Are there techniques that we can use from a database perspective that we can extrapolate and then continue on these studies based on what we are seeing? So from clinical design, study designs, to CMC compression of timelines, we have always done, or not always, we have done rolling submissions in the past. But here, there are many elements that even when you look at manufacturing validations, what are some of the key elements, like our CQAs, and that we focused on so that we could actually bring the products faster to patients that need it. Now, when we have done that, leveraging that experience to use for products that are in the pipeline so that we know now from that we are not sacrificing any quality, but how do we actually adopt the key elements of what we learned from pandemic development into traditional development is what we are actually working on, George, in a nutshell. And I can elaborate on any of these aspects as we go through.
Great. Thank you, Mohan. And I think that nicely summarizes a bit coming from what Oliver said in regards to collaboration, including also competitors and also having kind of the same purpose.
George, can I make one comment? That
Sure.
was a very important point that Oliver said. This is one time that we in industry, as all of us know, that we're willing to share our knowledge so that somebody is helped. One aspect of that is, in our own case, the vaccine that we were working on wasn't very successful, but our president of research came out and said, whoever that wants help, we will support them. And so we actually offered to make the J&J vaccine also to bring it to the market faster. And so this way, they were sharing the technology that they had, and we were actually helping the other company. In this case, the knowledge sharing was very open to help patients have the drugs faster.
Yeah, great. Kristian, coming to you. I mean, you see many different companies and consulting in different areas and globally as well in regions. So how do you see that the industry is addressing the need to be more responsive on the one hand to new platforms and modalities, a new way of working, but also market and patient needs?
Yeah, and look, Georg, thank you very much for the invitation as well. I can only echo the other panelists here. I would say we do see actually three shifts out there. And I think the first one is actually around organizational models. So now speaking a bit to CMC organizations, while in the past we've seen the traditional small molecule and the biologics, and if it was there a cell and gene therapy CMC organization, and I think we've done a survey with like 20 companies in 2019, and I think less than 10% actually had an integrated CMC function. That, however, switched quite significantly over the last couple of years, and I think now about a third, at least, of the larger companies do actually have integrated CMC functions, and it's more on capability focus to leverage some of the synergy. And I think that is, especially for the things which are at the border between, for instance, small molecules and biologics, so peptides, oligos, and so on, those are the things which are then shared and where the knowledge is a bit shared. So this is one of the shifts a bit away from those silos, I would say. And second major thing we actually do see is strategic partnerships. So I think Oliver already elaborated a bit to kind of like more open and more basic work with suppliers. And I would say a lot of the innovation is now not driven in-house any longer. So if you just look at the breadth of the different technologies, I think it's not only a CapEx, but especially a talent question and a capability question that you can't bring all of that basically in-house. So therefore, especially around the new modalities and specific parts, this is often where we do see more building of strategic partnerships, sometimes with targeted acquisitions, where you basically have some minor pieces you basically want to acquire to bring that technology in-house or that capability. But this is definitely a switch. Then I think a third thing, and that is maybe a bit more towards the entire market need, and at least also when the products are commercialized, is digital technologies. So what we do see is, for instance, that you more and more use digital technologies, for instance, for machine learning, forecasting, for sometimes earlier in the development simulation, so basically toxicity prediction and so on. Those are things which are more and more leveraged out there, and which basically give you a bit of an edge in the development, but then later on also bring you a bit closer to the patient and the market, and basically do see what is happening in the market and be able to react a bit faster to it.
Okay, great. I think we will dive a bit deeper in the digital space for sure, as that looks really to be a big enabler there. Before we go there, probably just a bit of provocative question. Both to Mohan from a originator company and Oliver from a CDMO perspective. So we can summarize and say, we have platforms for ensuring reliability and speed and also cost to the one hand. And on the other hand, we see more and more the flexibility we need to address specific needs and also the changing modalities. So how you strike a balance between the two, and how does then later on, Kristian, I come then to you, how will digital help us with this? And then we come to the risk-based approach later on. But just to start off, so the balance between achieving flexibility for speed as well as for new needs, but also looking for platforms from a quality, robustness, and also from a cost perspective. Oliver, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's a very interesting spot. And I would say as a CDMO, we need to be flexible. But flexibility also includes that you have robust platforms and robust processes. So there are always customers, they're going back to what is existing, and you need to have this offering. On the other hand, flexibility has three angles. One is with the assets. So you need to be able to adapt to new technologies rapidly. This means you need to have the capability to transform your assets within due time to have actually supported the customer requests. That's one element. So how do you build your facility? What is the kind of flexibility you bring into it? That's one element. The other element is exactly how do we do the tech transfer, and how do we use digital offerings to do these tech transfers? So that information and the data sharing becomes very, very important, and not only within the network, but also with the customer. So we call it in Lonza the Global Data Mart, which is a tool actually to provide data from our, pre-qualification runs, engineering runs with our customers to ensure we have a smart approach into tech transfers. That's a very, very important element. It's not fancy digital things, but it's very, very important for us that we can have the relevant information early on, and we can adapt accordingly our processes. The other thing is what was mentioned by Kristian, which is very important, skills and capabilities. And we learned that we can have, yes, even within the company, the exchange of skills and capability much faster through the learnings we made in the pandemic, with the virtual offerings we have. So that's very important. And the third element, also going to digital, is we call it the virtual engineering. So you do not need to send necessarily an SME, a specialist, an engineer on site for all cases. Yes, in some cases you need to do it, but you can do a lot, with also the virtual Googles we have, and then to look into things more closely. So there's this flexibility is important. But yes, Georg, there is always, also a wish to have a stable platform which are well known. We are running as we were used to run it in the 20 years, but we need to have this flexibility angle as well.
Yeah. No, great. Yeah, and probably along these lines, the same question to you, Mohan, and probably in the light of your work you're doing in the ICH Q13 specifically, how are we evolving there also with continuous manufacturing? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, the two things that come to my mind, I'll address the continuous manufacturing in a second, George. But balancing the question that you asked is probably, I feel, is one of the most important questions, because, in light of the number of things that we all have, how do we actually achieve this balance, especially when you have to bring something fast? And also, like, for example, in our own company in the past, our portfolio was probably significantly big on small molecules. And in the last decade or so, we are, like anybody else, we are moving into biologics, although we had vaccine experience. So one of the things that we actually have been doing consciously is to really educate and increase our capability in the areas that would need for the future, especially younger scientists that are willing to really take rotations so that they learn multitude of things rather than just actually practicing one. That actually gave us a flexible resources to use in different places. Obviously, we don't have all the things that we need. We are allowed to use, external CMOs and CROs to get our work done. So that has actually really helped, because the changing modality and how do we equip ourselves to really bring the current the employee force to really learn new things. In that context, maybe a subset of that is, for example, continuous manufacturing. And we are one of the companies that have been using continuous manufacturing to see if that will help us. And like what Oliver said and Kristian said, platform technologies, like does the product that we really are developing, will it fit into one of our platform technologies? That gives us more expertise, as well as transferring this to manufacturing sites becomes easier, because our manufacturing sites also are familiar with that. It's not fitting the molecule to the technology, but seeing if the molecule will enable using the experience we have on different technologies or platform technologies that we have. On a continuous manufacturing piece, just a couple of quick thoughts. And one of the things that we all know is the familiarity of accepting continuous manufacturing from, say, leading regulators such as EMA, FDA, PMDA, has been pretty good. While maybe companies chose not to file in many other countries or regions because of the lack of familiarity. So the ICH guideline, expert working group, that is one thing that we did consciously, educating the regulators to go to the different industry, especially based on modalities. And we were excluded, the industry experts were excluded from that for confidentiality. The regulators actually went to different companies to learn how it is set up, how it is used, what are all the things that industry is doing with a technology like that, and then bringing back to that to develop the guideline, how the expectations across the board can be unified or harmonized. So to that effect, there are the key aspects are definitions, regulatory concepts, scientific approaches, and regulatory expectations. And then we said that is not enough, because it may not give all the information that everybody wants. So we took examples like a drug substance, drug product, therapeutic proteins, an integrated system, and continuous manufacturing being a technology where it could operate for days, etc. So there are signals that could be, that one could see, that would be disturbances, and how do you handle that? How do you actually discard non-conforming materials on the fly? So those we captured as annexes with examples. So between the main body of the guideline, which speaks to the overarching requirements, and then the examples, hopefully will drive and help people to adopt more of a technology like continuous manufacturing, which is easier from a transport perspective, adaptation perspective.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mohan. And I think before we go into the Q&A session, I would want to really quickly just close the loop and come back to Kristian a little bit to get your insights from the industry. What are, for you, the 2-3 main drivers from a new technology perspective, either digital or others, that really can enable us to navigate different in that space, both from a flexibility platform perspective, but also having a conscious view on the speed, the quality, as well as the cost?
Yeah, very happy to. So look, I think during the pandemic, a lot of the process pieces, and I would say maybe there's a process element or process and governance element, and there's a digital element to it. And I think when we look out there, actually by now 90% of all companies we have asked do have some kind of a acceleration framework and acceleration approach out there. And I think that typically is set up in a like three-tiered approach to basically say, like, you have a hyper-accelerated, you have an accelerated, you kind of like have a standard development piece. And then often the strategic drivers like breakthrough designation are basically one of the key influencing factors where you land in that piece. And then often the second one is around what kind of platform do you have and how much experience do you have on that. I think one thing, however, what we do see there as well, is that there is not a stringent implementation of that actually being done. So if you ask the companies, I think only a third said that it's actually stringently and consistently and robustly implemented. And that it's basically differentiated by those, or consistently differentiated for those different type of accelerators. Often what companies are then doing is very different by company by company. We often do see that, especially in the formulation pieces, and that you are basically doing a lot of things at risk, that you're basically doing a lot of things in parallel, that you're often working with standard formulations and standard platforms, which is then accelerating, but that also varies by company. So I think they're maturing some of those governance processes and ideas behind that would for sure help to basically bring things quicker to market. Then I think maybe the second piece, coming back to the digital aspects, I think they are the entire in silico development pieces and leveraging new and digital technologies, both for collaboration. I think that is something Oliver and Mohan already elaborated on, for better collaboration, basically closer collaboration, bringing the subject matter experts together more globally, but then also leveraging those new and digital technologies, for instance, for that in silico development, to basically have property or toxicity predictions or stability predictions. Those are things we do see being employed more and more, which then basically also can shorten significant the timelines for development out there.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll ask you the first question here, and then you can point it to one of our panelists here. So the first one is, how do you think the new technology or pandemic situation is shaping the future trend of regulatory?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Who wants to give it a start there?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
And no, Oliver, if you want to go first, please do that.
No. Well, okay. All good. Just go.
I'll just start. I think, as I said a minute ago, one of the things that I see is willingness of regulators to work with industry, because what we have learned is to bring drugs faster to patients. In that context, certainly the example that I talked about was continuous manufacturing. We have seen both, US FDA, EMA regulators very willing to engage. For example, if you have an older product that you use batch process and you want to convert that because of a large volume product that can be made to meet the demands of the market, and how do you convert that to a continuous manufacturing, for example? And you can reach out to the regulators, and they've been very open to discuss and see the modelings that you use, how actually that you can convert that into your dossier, and the help that they give. So in a nutshell, what I wanted to say is the regulators, not only because of the pandemic, maybe that actually was a catalyst in them really engaging more with the industry, but they've been very supportive of using emerging technologies quite a bit. And that is a really welcome change. And not only use of that, what are the expectations from them so that we could actually implement these technologies and then use that for commercialization?
Great,
I think that to add on this, it's interesting to see, and when you think the very first day of Kymriah and the support we have for a new modality, from different regulators, that was really great. And then I think the art is, as an industry, together with regulatory bodies, the industry, CDMOs and innovators, everyone, to actually maintain a simplicity and actually to keep it such that it is fast, secure, efficient, but actually is also patient-centric. With new things, they are evolving, and then you can make something which becomes more and more complex. We have seen this in the biotech, from endless specification, vial safety, all is very relevant. But I think the art is to keep it such that we have the backbone which is needed to ensure efficiency and safety for the patient, but also to keep it such that it is fast and flexible enough. And I think this needs a constant dialogue with regulators as we go, and grow in modalities like in the CGT spot. That's very important for me. And I think the pandemic situation helped us to learn that this is in actual fact possible. So let's keep this momentum and let's bring it into the new technologies together as an industry.
Now that's great, and probably also, as I have mainly asked questions so far, but just the perspective also from Roche and Genentech. So obviously we're also driving a lot of innovation in the digital space as well as on the manufacturing side of things. And later on Friday we have a whole track on modular manufacturing, modular facilities, and so on. And it needs to go together. And of course, why are we doing this? Yeah, modular gives us the opportunity to scale when needed and scale out when needed. And when needed means depending on where is the demand, how is a certain profile of a crisis or of also a situation evolving, as we have seen it in COVID, as we probably also getting prepared with HERA in Europe and so on for follow-up events like this. And scaling out is a great opportunity to do, but it comes with a lot of new concepts. It comes with you start ordering equipment without an URS because you have it already from your previous equipment. You start to kind of copy-paste qualification concepts in different regulatory jurisdictions. You're building on a very robust supply chain of raw materials and also consumables and utilities that you are actually adding to your modular capabilities. And so many more things. And I think we have really good examples where this works already well, where also, for example, robotics can bring in robustness while being flexible. Yeah, that's, I think, also some element to that. But it's still a long way to go, and obviously the right questions asked, both from the industry, from the manufacturers, but also from health authorities. And with the digital capabilities, I think we can help really to give more insights, to really build a risk-based approach with enough online headline available data, and increase also the assurance around all of those new technologies. But it's a very relevant topic for sure. And along those lines, probably we have another question that I would direct now to Kristian. Which is kind of very specific to, can a panelist, also in this case Kristian, give an example of how digitalization has accelerated the CMC timelines? So do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, and look, I think some things where basically digitization, what I've seen is actually a combination of basically the data approach, a data-driven approach, combined with basically high throughput screening and lab automation, for instance. So what we've seen there is really cases where especially, and I think that is rather almost still in the research rather than in some of the development areas, where you've often seen that basically the amount of constructs, for instance, you're running through your early stages can be massively increased if you are using basically automation, LIMS, ELNS, and so on, and basically just then use, for instance, algorithm and machine learning algorithm for some of the analytics on basically predicting results, but then also analyzing results. Because then what is really powerful is often kind of like combining the predictions then with the real data once it comes in. What we've seen is that basically the lead time to basically hit some of the candidates in some of the cases for biotech I've seen then dramatically went down by a couple of months even, because just the amount of throughput increased that significantly. I think, and the second piece, what we've also seen, for instance, in all of the vaccine applications is that kind of like a rolling submission and a live feed of data almost to regulators has massively increased basically the speed to market. And I think there that collaboration of like live data capture, basically live syndication of the results, and then live sharing of those feeds with the regulators was one of the pieces, and I think maybe a prime example of actually where digital technology actually helped to accelerate the speed to market.
Okay. Thanks, Kristian. I see we have 2 minutes left, and before you, Oliver, and Kristian start in a new day, and Mohan, actually, I forgot to mention that at the beginning, you're dialing in from the US, so before you finish your day after this session, probably one last question to all of you with a short answer. So we talked a lot about what should be, we talked a lot about platform processes, state-of-the-art technologies that will help us together with collaboration. What in your view is a big watch out or a don't do, coming out of this time that we should also keep in mind as we are transforming in this post-pandemic operations in our industry? It's actually a question that we got from the from the audience. I think it's a challenging one. I need to also reflect, but someone probably wants to give it a go.
It's maybe more a philosophical question. The short one is, we should not go back to old habits. And we know that it takes about 67 times to train new things, that it sits in your brain and that you are going to accept it, you know, and I think let's really be on it, let's learn from it, and let's bring it to this next stage for the benefit of our customer and patients.
Thank you, Oliver. Mohan?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is the quick decision making to stop something, because sometimes, you know, we may have the data in front of us, but we may be iterating that many times to see if that can be made to work. When you're developing something very fast, maybe the insight into saying that we can stop this quick and then move on with something. And the other piece, George, is high prioritization, ruthlessly prioritizing to see what is important.
That's a good one. Kristian, last.
Yeah, don't go back to the old ways of working, especially in collaboration. So I've also enjoyed a lot of plane rides during a week, but I think by now a lot of us appreciate also the different ways of working. And I think that it has its merits, especially in team building, connectivity. There need to be in-person interactions, but I think don't be fooled into basically going back into everything needs to be in person again, because I think that would be a big miss of other ways to collaborate and basically get subject matter experts not in the region into a lot of discussions where it actually could help, even though they are in a different time zone. And I think this panel is actually one of the good examples of that. It also can work even though we are in completely different parts of the world.
Thank you very much. We're already over time. It was great having you again. Talk to you soon, and have a great conference as we move forward. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Good morning.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.